On the surface, it was the kind of life most people dream about. A beautiful home, a successful career, a marriage that looked by every measure like a fairy tale. But behind closed doors, something was deeply, terribly wrong. This is the story of Nancy Bowen, and the questions that still linger about how well we ever really know the people we love. Metier and Stephen Bowen were high school sweethearts. They reconnected years later. In 2022, they married in Broward County. That same year, they bought a home in Coral Springs, a place they would fill with memories of what seemed like a storybook romance. Behind the gates of a quiet residential community in Coral Springs, Florida, something was terribly wrong. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and the city's vice mayor had missed a commission meeting. For anyone who knew Nancy Bowen, that was unthinkable. This was a woman who never missed anything. Not a meeting, not a community event, not a chance to show up for the people she served. Just days earlier, she had been on the ground organizing an Easter egg hunt for children in her city. She had been side by side with Congressman Jared Moskowitz over the weekend. She was preparing to make the biggest announcement of her political career, a run for the United States Congress. But Nancy didn't show up on Wednesday, and the people who knew her best immediately felt the weight of that silence. Colleagues at Coral Springs City Hall tried to rationalize it at first. Commissioner Joshua Simmons later admitted he initially thought maybe she was just caught up with work, dealing with scheduling conflicts, the kind of mundane things that delay busy people. But as the meeting went on without her and calls went unanswered, concern turned to alarm. Someone made the decision to send officers to her home for a welfare check. What they found would send shockwaves through South Florida's political world and far beyond. Officers arrived at a gated residential development in Coral Springs near 127th and approached the home of the vice mayor. When they made entry, they discovered the lifeless body of Nancy Bowen in the second-floor master bedroom. She hadn't simply been left there. Her body had been wrapped in blankets and stuffed into black garbage bags placed on the bed. The scene was immediately classified as a homicide, and within minutes the quiet, tree-lined street was transformed. Crime scene tape encircled the house. Police cruisers lined the road. A mobile command unit rolled in as detectives began the painstaking work of piecing together what had happened inside those walls. The Coral Springs Police Department wasted no time pointing investigators in one direction. They announced almost immediately that this was being investigated as a domestic violence incident and that Nancy's husband, Stephen Bowen, was a person of interest. But Stephen wasn't at the house. He was gone. About a dozen miles away in the city of Plantation, a very different scene was unfolding. Residents at an apartment complex suddenly found themselves in the middle of what looked like a tactical operation. SWAT vehicles, police cruisers, and officers with guns drawn flooded the parking lot. Witnesses later described the chaos. One person recalled hearing a loud bang and wondering if it was gunshots before looking out the window to see law enforcement everywhere. The entire parking lot was blocked off. People were told to stay inside. This is where sources say police caught up with Stephen Bowen. He was taken into custody at that apartment complex without further incident. His Ford F-150 pickup truck was found on the property. Detectives combed the area thoroughly, and several vehicles were towed away as potential evidence connected to the investigation. But the trail didn't end in Plantation. Investigators learned that before Stephen Bowen made it to that apartment complex, he had made a stop, one that would become a critical piece of the case against him. According to the arrest report, after the killing, Stephen Bowen drove to a home in Lauderdale Lakes. There he visited an uncle, a man who, by all accounts, had no idea what had just happened. Stephen handed the uncle a rifle, and then he talked. He allegedly told his uncle that he had shot Nancy 3 times with a shotgun the previous night. He said that after shooting her, he had gone downstairs and slept in the home. He described how Nancy's body was rolled up in a comforter with a garbage bag around her feet. And when the uncle asked the most human question anyone could ask in that moment, why, Stephen Bowen reportedly gave a chilling 5-word answer. He couldn't take it anymore. That alleged confession to a family member would become one of the most damning elements of the case. But here's what makes it even more unsettling. When detectives finally had Stephen Bowen in an interrogation room, he went completely silent. He declined to speak with investigators and immediately requested a lawyer. The man who allegedly poured out the details of his wife's murder to a relative wouldn't give police a single word. Stephen Bowen, 40 years old, was officially booked into the Broward County Jail. He was fingerprinted, photographed, and his mugshot was released to the public. The charges were severe. One count of first-degree premeditated murder and one count of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. The tampering charge likely stems from the way Nancy's body was concealed, wrapped and bagged in that master bedroom, and possibly from the movement of the weapon to his uncle's home. His first appearance before a judge lasted exactly 55 seconds. Stephen Bowen stood silently as his attorney spoke on his behalf. The judge didn't need long to make a decision. On the murder charge, Stephen Bowen was ordered held without bond. He wasn't going anywhere. As the legal process ground forward, the community and the political world were reeling from the loss of a woman many described not just as a public servant, but as a force of nature. Nancy Bowen's story was one of breaking barriers. When she was elected to the Coral Springs City Commission in 2020, she made history as the city's first Black and first Haitian American woman to hold that office. It wasn't a symbolic appointment or a token achievement. Nancy earned it, and she used the platform relentlessly. She rose to the position of vice mayor and became known as someone who didn't just attend meetings, she drove results. Her passion was environmental sustainability, and she didn't approach it casually. She led the push to create an entirely new sustainable department within the city. She brought in a sustainability officer. She connected Coral Springs with international organizations dedicated to environmental policy. For a mid-sized Florida city, these were ambitious moves, and Nancy was the engine behind all of them. But her interest went far beyond environmental policy. Colleagues described her as someone who cared about everything: students, seniors, fairness, equality, culture. Commissioner Joshua Simmons spoke about her with a kind of reverence that went beyond political courtesy. She wasn't just doing a job, she was building something. Congressman Jared Moskowitz, who had been with Nancy just days before her death, described her as a fighter for her community. He revealed publicly what many in political circles already knew. Nancy Bowen was about to announce her candidacy for the United States Congress. She was a rising star, and the trajectory of her career suggested she was just getting started. Nikki Fried, the chair of the Florida Democratic Party, called Nancy a friend. Not in the hollow way politicians sometimes use the word, but with genuine grief. She said Nancy was a friend to everyone who has ever believed that democracy was worth fighting for, and that the world is less bright without her in it. Broward County Sheriff Gregory Toney, who had worked alongside the Coral Springs Police Department as a sergeant before Nancy was even elected, called her one of the most sincere public servants he had ever met. Not just in recent years, but in his entire lifetime. State Representative Dottie Joseph highlighted something that was central to who Nancy was: her deep, unwavering connection to the Haitian community. Nancy didn't just represent Haitian Americans symbolically. She showed up, consistently, visibly, meaningfully. She was a source of pride for a community that has long fought for representation in South Florida politics. Her family's statement cut through the political tributes with something more personal and more painful. While many knew her as a leader and an advocate, they wrote, "We knew her as a sister, a daughter, and a friend whose warmth and laughter filled every room." Her legacy will live on not only in the policies she helped shape, but in the countless lives she touched. A candlelight vigil was organized outside Coral Springs City Hall, a place where Nancy had spent countless hours working on behalf of the people who elected her. The outpouring of condolences stretched across party lines and county borders, from the Miami-Dade County Mayor to former commissioners in Tamarack, from state representatives to ordinary residents who had crossed paths with her at community events. And yet, beneath all the grief and the tributes, there were questions that no one could yet answer. Stephen and Nancy Bowen had been married for only a few years. Photos posted online showed them in what appeared to be happier times, smiling, together, presenting the image of a couple building a life. But something behind that image had been fracturing, and whatever it was, it ended in the most violent way imaginable. He couldn't take it anymore. That's what Stephen Bowen allegedly told his uncle. But what did that mean? What was he unable to take? Was there a history of conflict that no one saw? Were there warning signs that went unnoticed in the busy, public-facing life of a rising political star? These are questions investigators are still working to answer, and they are questions that haunt the people who thought they knew this couple. The case of Nancy Bowen is, at its core, a domestic violence story, one that ended in murder. It's a reminder that domestic violence doesn't discriminate by profession, status, or public image. Nancy was a vice mayor, a trailblazer, a woman on the verge of running for Congress, and she was killed in her own home, allegedly by the person who had vowed to love and protect her. The Florida Domestic Violence Hotline exists for anyone who finds themselves in danger or feels unsafe in a relationship. The number is 1-800-500-11199. It's a call that Nancy Bowen can no longer make, but it's a call that could save someone else's life. Nancy Bowen was 40 years old when she made history in Coral Springs. She was building a legacy that stretched from City Hall to the halls of Congress. She was a daughter of Haiti, a champion of sustainability, a voice for the voiceless, and a woman whose warmth, by every account, could light up a room. And now her husband sits in a cell in the Broward County Jail, held without bond, saying nothing to the people investigating her death, while the community she served holds candles in the dark and tries to understand how something so promising was destroyed so completely.